Hello, and welcome to the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Alex, and it is just me this week. No Mike on this one for reasons I'll get to in a little bit here. But with this week's episode, I wanted to have a bit of a discussion on something that kind of hung over all of our episodes with the Umbrella Academy, and that is the Netflix adaptation of the Umbrella Academy. Arguably probably the most popular thing that we've covered thus far, and I think you could say probably more people know the TV show, the Netflix show, than they do the comic. But we didn't want to talk about that when we discussed the book because, we didn't want to have any influence on our discussion. We wanted to focus our talk on what was on the page and on the page only. And the second reason why was that when we started our discussion of the Umbrella Academy comic, neither Mike and I had actually seen the Netflix show. I think Mike has seen one episode, the first episode so far. And when we started, I had only seen the first 3 episodes of the first season, which I had watched back in 2019 when they first dropped. I always meant to finish it and get around to it, but, at some point, it kind of falls on the back burner and it becomes on the, when I have time, I'll get to that at some point. Well, when Mike and I started to do our discussion on the comic, I figured now was the time. So as we were having our discussions of the comic, I binged my way through, got through all 3 seasons, and I think it was prudent to have a discussion now because I think there are things that we talked about in our discussion about the books that are relevant to the show. And I think there are things we can take from the show that I think could potentially feed back into the things we talked about in the comics. And similar to what we had our discussion of with Paper Girls, back in the first season of the Storied Arcs podcast, after we finished our discussion of the book there, the adaptation dropped on Amazon Prime, and we wanted to see kind of a little more of a comparison of what they added, what they changed, how we felt about these things. And of course we were hoping for what they could go forward with Paper Girls, which obviously isn't going to happen now. Thanks a bunch for that, Amazon Prime. But, I want to have kind of a similar conversation with the Umbrella Academy, even though it's going to be a lot harder because the show takes a lot more liberties. They take a lot more left turns, and they're kind of really doing their own thing there. So because Mike hasn't seen the show yet, I didn't want to spoil it for him to have this kind of in-depth conversation on some of the specific story points. But I guess if he ends up listening to this anyway, then it's all for naught. But, oh well. Anyway, the Netflix show. When it was first announced, I was very excited, because I really enjoyed this book. I love the weirdness of it. I love how kind of odd it is, specifically for being a quote unquote superhero story. It's not focused so much on the superheroing aspect, which I think is really, really great. And it's obviously, I think that's intentional for what Way and Ba try to do in the universe that they're trying to build. It's not about the powers so much. It's not about the mission. It's not about a villain of the week. It's not about going out and fighting a rogues gallery or anything like that. It's about the relationships. It's about this dysfunctional family. And the first thing that strikes me about the show is that they latch onto that immediately and understand very, very quickly and understand fully that this is what the story is about. No matter what situation we put them in, no matter what storyline we go down, no matter what we do or don't borrow specifically from the comic, this story is about the siblings. It's about the 6 of them, 7 if you include Ghost Ben in there. It's about the siblings. It's about the Umbrella Academy. And everything they went through as children, leading to kind of how screwed up they are now as adults, trying to figure out how to really be siblings, when they never really had that before. Because arguably growing up, you could say that they were more of a team and less of a family. So how do they figure out how to be a family now? And you focus on that. And the show zeroes in on that. And so that allows them to take these detours away from the comic. Now, the first season of the show, that one kind of hews most closely to the comic in the Apocalypse Suite. It's focused around Vanya and her her latent or I guess suppressed ability, and then when it's unleashed, it's so massive, it's so powerful. As Mike and I talked about, that there's very much a Jean Grey Dark Phoenix comp there, that you got to put boundaries on this, because your power is so massive that when unleashed, it can literally destroy the world. And of course, that's what happens in Apocalypse Suite in Volume 1 of the comic, and it happens in the show as well. But what I really liked about what the show did is it slow played. It was allowed. It had the room to kind of slow play, not just the reveal, but the ultimate outcome. In the comic, Vanya, she turns into the white violin in like issue 3 or 4, something like that. Basically halfway through the arc, she's the villain, or she becomes the villain, because initially it's set up of the conductor, this mysterious guy, masked guy, who's putting together this orchestra of death. He somehow he recruits Vanya because he apparently knows that she has some kind of latent power that's never explored in the book, about how he knows to tap into this. And when he does, she fully takes over and immediately kills the conductor, and now she's in charge of this orchestra of death, and she becomes the villain through the back half of the. She's actively the villain for the back half of the comic. In the show, they're able to they introduce this character, this Leonard character, which once they introduced him in the show, it made me realize an aspect of the world the comic introduced that I was missing, which was the idea of who are these other kids that were born on the same day as the Umbrella Academy. Now, of course, Leonard's a special case here. He was born at the same time, on the same day as the Umbrella Academy kids and the other 43 kids that were born that day. But because he was born through a normal pregnancy and not through the extraordinary immediate circumstances as the UA kids did, he is normal, but yet he grows up seeing the Umbrella Academy and seeing their exploits and reading the comic books and the news coverage and the figurines and all that stuff, the toys. He sees all that and feels a connection to it. But because he gets rejected by Hargreaves as being, ordinary or normal or whatnot, he carries this vendetta. And so the idea that he would then find a way to manipulate the Umbrella Academy to get back at them and do that through Vanya, because he finds out that Vanya has these latent hidden powers. And for that to be this driving force and giving the villain some actual motivation here that didn't exist in the comic, I think that was really, really great. The way that he's able to kind of needle his way in and really play on the isolation that Vanya feels. And that's one of the big character changes, I think, from the show, from the comic to the show, is that, in the comic, you get the sense that Vanya isn't just like a pariah or an outcast. Like you get the sense that there's like zero contact with the family, while in the show, it seems like, well, she wrote the tell-all book that, clearly the family wasn't a fan of. But you get a sense that there's still a little bit of acceptance. Allison, has some sympathy or empathy towards her. They try to have some warmness. The fact that she would even come back, that she would even consider coming back to the house for the funeral of their father, is a step beyond even that than what comic Vanya has. So it's almost like by bringing her, as opposed to having her completely on the outside of the family, having her on the outskirts, but like still looking in, it like that almost makes her more isolated. And I think what's really interesting, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but the casting of Elliot Page as Vanya, makes Vanya incredibly small, like physically small, because Elliot Page is very small. And so standing around all of the other siblings, the ones that are there, for Luther, Diego, Allison, and Klaus, they're all relatively tall people. And so the only person that's about Vanya's size is 5, and 5 is supposed to be, on the show, like a 13, 14-year-old boy, so physically, when they're all around each other, when they stand in a group, Vanya is just so naturally diminished. And so it's easily to dismiss her, as not being part of the group. And I think that was kind of a genius stroke there, whether that was intentional or not, whether it was just find the best person for the role, I don't know. But just from a visual standpoint, it works so well to really heighten her isolation. I think that's really, really, really cool. The other thing they do story-wise in this first season is, they bring forth the commission a lot sooner. And a little bit of 5's history, and specifically they bring forth, Hazel and Cha-Cha. And I love what Hazel and Cha-Cha were in the show, because I find them kind of stupid in the comic. They show up in volume 2 in Dallas, and they're hunting 5 on behalf of the commission. And it's clear that they're just these kind of hyper sugar obsessed maniacs who just want to kill people. And you can tell from the way they're presented on the page, all their text, it's all loud and screaming, everything is just, they're yelling all the time. And if you tried to do that on screen, that would wear thin incredibly quickly. So to make Hazel and Cha-Cha, they're still assassins. They still have the ridiculous masks on when they need them. But to make them like just part of the corporate grind, and to have Cha-Cha be complaining about he's got carpal tunnel because he's got to carry the briefcase around, which is the teleporter. The idea that like, oh, it's not covered by workers' comp or whatnot. Just this kind of make them kind of office drones, and oh yeah, we're constantly getting these messages, these memos from the head office, blah 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 blah. But of course, their job is still to travel through time and space and kill people. But it's still just any other job. I think that's a hilarious recharacterization, and it makes them far more interesting, and it allows them to be in the story a lot longer, as opposed to just showing up in the comic in volume 2 in the Dallas arc, just showing up, kidnapping people and trying to hunt down 5, only then to be killed when after they kill Klaus, Klaus resurrects himself and takes over the bodies, and then they're done, and Hazel and Cha-Cha are done. And, and then they do get a one-shot special. There is a Tales from the Umbrella Academy comic, Hazel and Cha-Cha Save Christmas, I think. And again, I don't find their comic characterization all that interesting. So to see them actually be main characters in the first season of this show, and to have their partnership and their relationship to their work be kind of forefront for them, I think it works great. And it's a way to take these characters that are like literally one-note characters, or 2 characters in the comic that just, they're the exact same. They're just, there's no difference between Hazel and Cha-Cha. Who is Hazel and who is Cha-Cha in the comic? It doesn't matter. But by giving them different personalities and different kind of views on the world and the job in the show, it actually makes them characters, which I think is really, really great. And it makes for a lot of fun there. You know what? I still like in the end that for season 1, that they did, story-wise, they kept to a lot of the same beats, even though they got there in a lot of different ways. It still ends with Vanya becoming the white violin, becoming possessed by her power, and still, exploding the moon, and that being the impetus for the world ending. A large chunk of the moon falling in and impacting the earth, and that kills everybody. I like the idea that how they stop her is, still with the gunshot, but, in the comic, it's a shot to the head, which she survives, but has kind of loss of motor function and kind of, mass grade amnesia. I like that it's a similar idea. It's playing on the idea that Vanya can affect sound waves. and turn those into, and that's kind of her trigger to activate her power. So the idea that a gunshot like right next to her ear disrupts her and knocks her out, and then through how they save her with this, how they end the apocalypse. Well, I guess they don't actually stop the apocalypse in this case. The apocalypse still happens. What they do instead is they time travel back to the past so they don't experience the apocalypse. They go back to 1960s Dallas. So they have a few decades before where the apocalypse comes again. They try to prevent it that way. But the idea that gunshot that Allison rings out here in this case also gives Vanya a level of amnesia. When she drops back into the 1960s, she has no memory of anything, which, that's a nice parallel to the setup that Vanya has going forward in both volumes 2 and 3, and that again she has no real memory of what she did and what she became, and so in the comic then she's basically removed from the storyline. It's more of she's there for other characters to react to, especially Allison, like Allison kind of lashing out at her, trying to force Vanya to remind her what she did, to really try to heap blame on her, even though at this point she has no memory of it. So by doing it this way, and by tweaking the Dallas story, by literally taking everyone to the past, as opposed to that just being the end of the comic, it keeps everyone engaged. I think it's, they find a way, they still find a way to make some interesting parallels. Cause, at the end of volume 2 in the comic, we do have everyone in Dallas, specifically there in 1963, in and around the Kennedy assassination. That's where 5 has to go. He takes Allison with him, and, Luther, Diego, and Klaus, they're trying to stop him. They're trying to find a way to stop him, try to stop 5. And so they get back to 1960s. Of course, the way the comic works out, they drop back into Vietnam in 1960. So they kind of overshoot their landing spot. And, there's a fun play on that in the show, in that Klaus finds one of the commission's briefcases, doesn't know how it works, but you see him disappear off a bus, just thinking maybe he found some money or something to sell or whatnot. And then he reappears back on the bus, and it's clear, he has, with the dog tags and the kind of the ODs and all that, he is, you assume he's been to battle, and you find out that he has been to Vietnam, served 3 years in Vietnam, and then came back. So there's still a nice tie in there in terms of sending our characters to Vietnam and having that experience. The one thing that's missing, I think, from the show is that the moment that I love so much from the comic, which is Allison taking the place of Jackie. And after they stop 5, because older 5 is in the book depository in the place of Oswald in the comic, so he can't take the shot. There's no one there to assassinate Kennedy, but having Allison be in the car next to him as Jackie, with Mr. President, I heard a rumor that the back of your head is about to explode, and having that be the cause of the assassination. That was such a great twist and use, I think, of the time travel idea and Allison's powers. We don't get that here, but I think we get something that's, I don't know about more interesting, but I think equally as interesting, again on this parallel track, by dropping everyone back into the 60s and forcing them to live multiple years, because they don't drop all at the same time, adds for this interesting drama that's specific to the show because of how they cast the show. The idea that they did cast a diverse, multicultural Umbrella Academy. So it doesn't really matter specifically in the first season or at all that Allison is black or that Diego is Hispanic. I think he's meant to be Mexican. Specifically, none of that really matters at all. But when you're dropped back into 1960s Dallas, it matters quite a bit. And now they can play on that. You can have Allison be part of the civil rights movement there. You can have Diego be treated not as a crazy person because he's ranting about got to save the president and all that, but he can be dismissed even further because he's the crazy brown guy talking about these conspiracy theories. You can now use these aspects of these characters and find a different depth and a different motivation. And I think the stuff specifically with Allison and her time in the civil rights movement, by placing her back there and having her have a role in the civil rights movement in Dallas, really adds something to her character, especially when you think about what her power is and how at this point she's refusing to use it because she has come to understand or believe and or understand that her power is a curse. The one major change from the comic to the show with Allison is that in the show, she's a famous movie star. She still has a marriage that's kind of on the out. She still has a daughter named Claire that, she feels she doesn't spend enough time with. But the idea of her being this wildly famous person, someone who was famous already, someone who was famous as a child for being part of the Umbrella Academy and then goes on to be a world famous actress as well, is a great departure from the comic where that Allison clearly wants nothing to do with the spotlight, wants to just have a home life, a quiet home life with her husband and her daughter. And she can't have that because, as we find out in the comic, that, maybe she had used her powers to manipulate her husband into falling in love with her and having a family and moving forward. And when that comes to the surface, whether or not it's true, her husband believes it, and Allison is uncertain if she did or not. So that becomes irreconcilable. Now we have Allison understanding or believing that maybe everything she has, including her family, including her career, is due to her using her ability, her rumor power, and look what that's wrought. And so now, when she's thrown back into the heart of the civil rights movement, and you think about, well, what could she do with her power to change people's minds? To get them to do whatever she wants. What kind of effect can that happen? And of course, then you get to the larger questions about time travel of, if he went back in time and killed Hitler and things like that, blah, 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 blah. But that isn't the reason she's doing it. She's not doing it so much because she has this idea of we have to preserve history, blah, blah, blah. She's doing it kind of on a selfish reason in that she believes that using it is a curse. And it's only when she's absolutely forced to, when her husband in 1963, Ray, is getting beaten down in the street by the police, does she step in and actually use her power on a white cop to get him to walk away. And of course, Ray sees that and freaks out immediately. But then, once she sits down and talks to him about it and they kind of talk through the idea of, her being a time traveler and things like this and not being from this era and having these powers, there is this question of like, well, if you can do that, then why can't you just fix everything here? And there still is this idea of her holding back because she understands that there's a cost to it. And seeing her grapple with that in a time when you could make an argument that she could use her powers for the greater good, and of course I think that phrase, the greater good, is an incredibly fraught phrase anytime that's brought up. But you can make an argument there that in that time, in that moment, it's not so cut and dry as to does she or does she not use her powers to affect history as a whole. You could see a side or be like, well, you know what, you save a lot of heartache and a lot of trouble if you did that. Of course, then what the repercussions are down the line, how things change, you have no idea. And of course, we see that when season 3 comes around, of how simply their presence in 1963 changes things. But I liked that. I liked that deepening of her character, of Allison's character, and really all the characters because of what we see, what they go through in Dallas. You have Vanya coming to a slow realization of her or what her memories are, but her finding Sissy and Sissy's son. I'm blanking on the name right now. was it Harold? Harlan is what his name was, having connection with them. You had Klaus and his connection with Dave, the soldier he meets out in Vietnam. You have another introduction of another kind of one of these special kids in the Lila character who ultimately is there with Diego. And again, it goes back to the idea that was put into my mind with Leonard from season 1. Of course, Leonard being a kid born on the same day and time as the Umbrella Academy, but through a normal pregnancy, you find out that Lila is a kid born like the Umbrella Academy kids, someone who was born from an immediate unexpected pregnancy on that day and has a power. And of course, she was, I'm going to say, recruited or basically kidnapped by the handler as part of the commission, because she wanted to have someone with powers on her side. Lila's power being that she can replicate any one of the powers that she's near. It's like she's like Sync from the X-Men. And the idea that there are more of these kids out there, and then maybe they grew up with normal, stable families, because you would assume that had the handler not come in when Lila was 4 and had her parents murdered, that Lila would have grown up with what seemed to be a loving and caring family. So are there other kids out there who have been living these past 30 years, with these powers, but not superheroes like the Umbrella Academy, and who aren't all screwed up? And so the idea that you're introducing more of these kids and more of these kind of what ifs into the story, I really, really like that. And it's something that I wanted more of. And again, looking back on the comic, I realized, boy, that'd be a really good idea. I would love to see more of them. Who are these characters? Who are these other kids out there? We got 7 in this book that are the Umbrella Academy, but there were 43 that children that were born at the same time. So that seemed like a rich area for the story to go down that I'm glad the show did. And once the show did it, I realized, boy, I really wish the comic would have done that too. So that's one way that I think the feedback loop can work its way back to the source. And you think that, something that they think they would like to do and want to do, which, then, it shows that, that I think these are some ideas that Way and Ba had, because obviously at the end of volume 3 of Hotel Oblivion, you introduced the Sparrow Academy. Now, of course, they aren't named the Sparrow Academy. We only really know that thanks to the show, but you see the insignia. It's a bird. The bird's on the cover of the final issue, issue 7 of Hotel Oblivion. And we see this idea that Grace, their mother, brings them to this other place in Norway, and then this other team that she brings Vanya to, and they say that we're your family. And then at the end of the big battle, this other group of powered people come down, and, the lead one introduces himself as number 1. So this idea that there is another version or an alternate version of a superhero team. And again, because we've seen the show, it feeds back in. You assume that these are other kids that were born at the same time that Hargreaves just didn't adopt. And so it is like, this is an idea that Way and Ba had, because again, they put it at the end of Hotel Oblivion, which came out and was written before the first season of the Netflix show even dropped. So it was an idea that they clearly wanted to get to, but because the show was in production and in movement, it's like they took that idea and they accelerated it by putting it in the show, and again by making the Sparrows the focus, or kind of one of the main focuses of season 3 of the show, when they're planned to be volume 4 of the comic, shows that they had this idea but wanted to get to it a little sooner. And I just like the fact that they kind of seeded this earlier, specifically with Lila, this idea that there are who are these other kids that are out there? Now, of course, when we get to season 3, again, once again, the apocalypse follows them to Dallas in 1963. And once again, it's kind of Vanya's fault. She's arrested. She blows up the FBI building behind the motorcade, which prevents Kennedy from being assassinated. But they think the explosion that Vanya caused, is actually the Russians, the Soviet Union, and that causes World War III. And then like a week after Kennedy's supposed to be assassinated. All the nukes get fired and everybody dies. Once again, Vanya's power, at least this time, is a little less directly involved. Season 1, her power comes directly out of her. This beam of actualized sound waves goes to the moon, blows it up, and that's what kills the Earth. Here, in trying to escape federal custody, she caused an explosion. That explosion doesn't lead to the end of the world, but resulting from it does lead to the end of the world. So kind of 2 for 2, she's kind of been responsible, which I think is kind of a funny gag that they keep going back to because it happens again in the 3rd season as well. But, this time, in order for the Umbrella Academy to escape, they simply jump ahead to the future now. Going back through and knowing that they prevent World War III, but they jump back into the future to again avoid, the world doesn't end. There's a world that's there, so there is no more apocalypse. But now what season 3 shows is, again, we have now an alternate timeline version of the world. So first is jumping back in time, kind of back to the future-ish, and then jumping forward in time, trying to return back to your original timeline, but the mere fact that you went back in time and changes things. And so when they jump back to 2019, it's a completely different world. You now have the Sparrow Academy. The 7 of them were never adopted by Hargreaves. Hargreaves saw them, met them, in kind of a funny moment, realizes that they're all terrible people, and that they're all like bad human beings. So he explicitly goes out of the way to look and adopt other kids that were born on that day. Of course, then we come to find out that the Umbrella Academy that we know were never born. That their mothers died like the morning of when they were supposed to be born, like everybody else. So we've now created what they call the grandfather paradox. If your grandfather died, if you go back in time and kill your grandfather, what happens to you? Because if your grandfather dies and your parents are never born and you're never born, which means you can never go back in time to kill him in the first place, that's kind of standard time travel stuff. They touch on it in like Tenet and things like that. It's like the butterfly effect. It's one of those hallmarks of time travel stories. But they've created that because they are here now because of their time travel antics. They are now here in 2019, even though they shouldn't be, because they should have died before they were even born. So that creates what they call the Kugelblitz, which again is another world-ending thing. And the reason, of course, their parents are dead is because Harlan, the little boy that Vanya was looking after with Harlan's mom Sissy on their farm in Dallas, by saving his life back in 1963, Vanya transfers some of her power to Harlan, and Harlan doesn't want to control it. And, on the day that all these kids are supposed to be born in 1989, Harlan's mom dies, and Harlan can't control his power and reacts violently. And that's what ends up killing all the mothers of the Umbrella Academy. So again, Vanya, of course, now Victor now in season 3, but not directly involved, but indirectly involved again in causing the end of the world. So again, this running gag that no matter what they do, the Umbrella Academy, wherever they go, they're going to cause the apocalypse. It's going to kind of be Vanya/Victor's fault, but they're going to come together and figure out a way to stop it in the end. Season 3 is the one I think that deviates the absolute most, because again, I think if you listen to the conversation that Mike and I had last week about Volume 3, Hotel Oblivion of the comic, it wasn't our favorite. I think because the specific storyline involving what Hotel Oblivion is in the comic just wasn't interesting. The idea that it's this prison cell for all these villains that the Umbrella Academy defeated when they were a super team as kids, just, no reason to care about it, no reason to be invested in it. And so to have this mass breakout and have some of the story be fractured and focused on some of these characters breaking out, it didn't land. So for the show to take that idea and just take the name, because I guess that's a pretty good name, Hotel Oblivion. Of course, it's obscured initially as Hotel Obsidian, but just taking that idea and making it a physical place but doing something completely different with it, I think is super smart because, again, you distance yourself from the comic and the source. So you don't have to circle back and be like, oh, well, at some point, like, they got to go through, it's the White Buffalo room and the pachinko machine. You don't got to go through that. And then, oh, wait, this is now a prison for all their villains. That isn't what it is. They didn't feel the need to circle back and make that make that explicit tie back to the comic. They felt free to do whatever they wanted, and I think we got a much better story out of it because of it. The idea that they're in this alternate reality world where the Sparrows are the superhero team, and they're much more organized and much more capable, I guess. And it was funny, again, if you listened last week to the conversation that Mike and I had about speculation of what this hypothetical fourth volume of the comic could be, and knowing that it's called Sparrow Academy, and the things we would kind of want to see maybe with the Sparrow Academy and their interactions with the Umbrella Academy, the characters that we know. It was funny that what Mike said was, something that he would hope to see in this, hypothetical, theoretical, hopeful volume 4 of the comic is the Sparrow Academy comes in, and initially they're shown to be so great. They're shown to be so perfect, so ideal, like they got their stuff together, and you look down at the Umbrella Academy and they're just broken and dysfunctional and screwed up and they can't get anything right. And so you initially see the Sparrows as this is what the Umbrella Academy was supposed to be. They're the perfect version of that. But then you start chipping away and start seeing that, wait, no, hold up. They're maybe, okay, they had better upbringing, they're a better team, they work better together, but they're still just as screwed up and messed up people. And that it's not about being normal or anything like that. It's about the bonds. And maybe the Umbrella Academy is a better family together. Even though they're dysfunctional, they look out and work better together as a family as opposed to being a team. And then you start tearing the Sparrows down, and you start seeing that maybe the Umbrella Academy isn't so screwed up. They're not so bad to begin with. And it was funny to hear Mike say that because, man, that's what you see in season 3 of the show. Initially, the Sparrow Academy, they're loving, they're adored, everyone knows them, albeit they're a little over the top with their policing, a little fascist. There's a total clampdown, this idea that they're always watching, and that they kind of act just kind of with impunity with everything they do. That they're basically untouchable. So you see that they're not quite as perfect as everything seems. But to see that was the kind of idea that Mike would want to see in the comic is the exact idea that they go with in the show. I thought was really, really interesting, and it shows that when you introduce this idea of this other superhero team, these other kids with these powers born on the same day, just maybe in a different environment, you get a different outcome. You get a seemingly different outcome, but in the end, maybe you don't, because the thing that the Umbrella Academy has is this idea of family, which, one thing you see with the Sparrows is that they don't view each other as family. They don't view them as siblings. They really view them as teammates. And ultimately, that is what, in the show, what allows the Umbrellas to I guess I won't say come out victorious, but ultimately, save the day in terms of stopping the Kugelblitz. I guess they do so by resetting the universe again into something else different. But the idea that you have these other characters, these other superpowered people at this point, adults, as being a foil for our characters. Just seemed like such an obvious idea, and it's one that because we've seen a version of it in the show now, it makes me even more, I don't know about excited, but more hyped for potential volume 4 of the comic, because I would want to see what kind of things do they bring from what you saw in the show, because now people coming to the comic now, if they come to volume 4 and they see it's Sparrow Academy, there's probably a lot of people who started with the show first and worked backwards to the comic. And that wouldn't shock me at all. So they would already have the knowledge of the Sparrow Academy and know who some of these have an idea of who some of these characters are, or at least who they think they are from what they saw on the screen. And in the short while we saw the Sparrows at the end of volume 3 of the comic, you saw some of their powers. Like, it looked like number 1 for the Sparrows looked like he was strong. It looked like there was one of the characters that he looked a little deformed, and misshapen, that when he stabbed himself, 3 of the bad guys he was fighting felt the stab. That's one of the powers that we saw on the show, much like number 1 having super strength and all that in the show and in the comic. It looked like one of the comic Sparrows might have been wearing big dark sunglasses to indicate they were blind, and then that character turned into a flock of birds. You know what? We saw that in the show as well. A blind character who sees who sees through a flock of crows or ravens. I can't remember which one they were, but the idea that they control a flock of birds as their power, as their eyes and ears through the world. There was a character in the comic that looked like they were shooting some sort of venom or something out of their mouths there. We got a version of that in the show as well. There's a character who shoots like a hallucinogenic acid or something like that, which of course that leads to the great Footloose dance scene that starts off the season 3. Kind of random dance scenes is very much an Umbrella Academy show thing. It fits with the kind of the weird vibe that they're trying to get off and they're trying to give off, and I think it works well. And the Footloose one, I remember seeing that as a clip going around, and because I hadn't seen the show yet, I had no idea what the context was around it, but I thought it was a great scene. That was really hilarious. But it was great to finally watch the episode and be like, oh, okay, this is why we're doing that. There's actually no reason for it other than I think they thought it was funny, but you tie it into the fact that one of the Sparrows has this hallucinogenic kind of acid that she shoots. Of course, then it raises a larger question of why would that be what Diego's hallucinating about? Because presumably, as we see her power work later, when she infects 5 with it, and of course 5 sees Dolores, the mannequin he was with all those years he was trapped in the future. So presumably these hallucinations tap into some sort of subconscious thing in each of the characters. So the fact that Diego hallucinated a dance scene to Footloose, I think speaks a lot to who he is as a character. But again, so returning to what we could see in volume 4 of the comic, obviously I don't think it's an alternate universe version, like we saw in the show. I think the characters that show up at the end of the big battle in volume 3 of the comic, I think those are of the same universe. I just think it's a different new academy. And it may be a different training ground, a different idea. And maybe it's similar to the idea of the show in that, I was going to say maybe it's different that they think of themselves as a team, but I guess when Vanya is introduced to them, they do say that they tell her that they're her family. So maybe not. Maybe it is a little different. Maybe it is still this idea of that this found family, this surrogate family thing. But I don't think it's going to be an alternate universe thing. I think that's the realm of the show only, but I'm super interested to see how much of these maybe not just the characterizations, but the specific characters and the relationships of the Sparrows, if some of that stuff that they used in the show were maybe ideas that Wei and Ba had for ultimately for volume 4 of the comic. I don't know. I'm interested to see it, and oh god, I really, really do want it, and I would love it if somehow volume 4 of the comic came out around the same time as season 4 of the show. As I'm recording this right now, it's April 2023. We know is that season 4 of Umbrella Academy is in production. They started earlier in 2023, earlier this calendar year. So I would guess that that season 4, which is the final season, probably comes out sometime in 2024. I'd be shocked if it came out. Yeah, I don't think it'd be ready by the end of 2023. So probably sometime spring, maybe early summer 2024, final season of the show. And that'd be a perfect time if they dropped volume 4 of the comic. I don't know. I haven't seen any updates on it, but it'd be great if that timing kind of worked out, that synergy worked out. It's something that Marvel has tried to do a bunch. To have a book on the shelf for a character of whatever's coming out in the next show or next movie or whatever. They tried doing some of that. COVID pauses and delays in both the production of the TV shows and movies and the comics kind of derailed some of that, so the timing didn't work out. So, there are always attempts at trying to have something in the comic shop that relates to the thing you have coming out in a streaming show or a movie theater or something like that, but never quite works out. But boy, I wish they could do it with the Umbrella Academies. I think it'd be really great. Even though whatever's happening in season 4 of the show, it probably isn't gonna have anything to do with what happens in the comic, but just having that connection there, I think could be really, really great. Because at this point, season 4, they activate the thing that was hidden in Hotel Oblivion, which again resets the universe. I guess it resets it to the desires of the person that programmed it, which was Hargreaves, and then when they step out, after everything, Allison kind of intercedes and Hargreaves doesn't quite get off his plan exactly as it is, but she intercedes and they walk out of this hotel into this whole brand new different world. I don't know if that's a alternate reality or another reality or whatever it is, but none of the Umbrella Academy has powers. They've all been depowered, and we see Hargreaves up there, and we see him with his wife, his alien wife from we saw introduced to once. We saw her die back at the beginning of the first season. I think it was the first season at least. But kind of in his backstory, so that was what Luther was guarding on the moon, and so these are elements that were, that are show creation only. So got no idea where it's going to go with that, with the idea of what the show's going to do. Because again, their track is now so far beyond what the comic is doing that, there's no way to speculate how that stuff could feed back into the comic. But, it could maybe somehow, but the clear case is seeing that because the Sparrows have already been introduced, because you've already seen them in the show, and really we saw them first in the show, the idea that they're going to then be brought into, and they were always the plan to be volume 4 of the comic. It's curious to see how much is going to play back, how much the show will affect or might have an effect on the comic, or how much of the comic or how much of that was already written. The idea that, again, I don't know how long it takes them to make these comics, but because they seeded the idea of the Sparrows in volume 3 of the comic, which came out 2018, 2019, well before season 3, well before they even knew they were going to have a season 3 of the Netflix show, are the ideas that they used in the show the stuff they already had for the comic, or were they new ideas they brought in specific for the show that maybe they want to adapt the other way for the comic? I don't know, but I'm excited to see it. I hope we get to see it. I really hope we get to see it. Sorry. I'm pretty sure we're going to get it at some point. I really do. I think volume 4 will come at some point. However skeptical I may have sounded in prior episodes of this show and this discussions with Mike, I do think we will get volume 4 of the Umbrella Academy at some point. The thing I hope for is that we get it in a timely manner. I really hope we get it to time with the season 4 of the show on Netflix, but I'm not holding my breath for that. But as long as it doesn't take another 9-10 years, I'll be happy. At this point, I guess if it comes out, I guess we're already sitting on 4 years now. So next year, 5-6 years, it wouldn't be the worst thing. We'll be a lot closer, a lot sooner than Hotel Oblivion came after Dallas. So that's what I'm hoping for. Because I want to see if the show has any effect on the comic, because that can happen with adaptations. If a show, quote unquote, goes past where an ongoing story is going, or has left off, thinking about something like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones, no matter what George R.R. Martin does now, For a lot of people, the ending is already written. Whether or not you like the ending of the show or not, they got there first, well before George did. And so as much as the books came first, and that is the source and that is the originator, everything that comes out now is going to be seen as coming in second. Whether it's better or worse or not, quality aside, how people are going to take it, how the audience is going to react to it aside, it's always going to feel like it came in second because the show got to the end first. With something like the Umbrella Academy, I don't know if it's that cut and dry because, again, they are telling completely different stories. And where the show ends at the end of this upcoming fourth season, I don't think it's going to have any effect on what the comic is going to do. But there are things that I think the comic could potentially pull from in their fourth volume. Now, whether or not that's the final volume of the Umbrella Academy, I hope not. I would love if this thing kept going. I just want the breaks in between arcs to be shorter, but I would love for it to keep going. And then who knows, maybe it does eventually get to a point where the things they do in this upcoming season 4 of the show, maybe it does feed back into the comic eventually. Maybe that's in volume 5 or volume 6 of the Umbrella Academy. And if we get that far, maybe that's in like 25 years or something like that when the comic is still going, but the breaks between arcs are getting longer. So, but so I think that's all I have to say really about the show and about the adaptation and how it relates to the comic. Again, I know, looking at the books that we've done, Mike and I like to pride ourselves on finding indie comics, creator-owned comics, and of course, we do big names in the comic industry from books like Brubaker and Phillips, Lemire, Hickman, some big name creators, but maybe books that people overall haven't really read. Paper Girls is probably the most popular we had done, but I think Umbrella Academy by far is the book that has the widest reach because the show is the most popular. So we like to pride ourselves on picking maybe some of the lesser known stuff, but every once in a while it's nice to go into something that more people have seen and hopefully more people have read as well. So, because of that, we felt we had to have a discussion on the show and how it related to the book. But that's all we have to say so far for the show and for the Umbrella Academy now. Again, if this volume 4 ever comes out and we're still on the air, we will definitely review it and revisit it. And then maybe if it comes out at the same time the show, we'll do a full revisit on both. But listen, in the meantime, if you've got thoughts on the show or the comic of the Umbrella Academy, if you came to one or the other first and think I'm way off base on how I think of how the adaptation went, sound off. We'd love to hear from you. Storied Arcs, at Storied Arcs on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us online, storiedarcs.com. There is a Facebook page. We're really not active there at all. Instagram and Twitter are the way to go. Reach out to the website, storiedarcs.com. You can find us there. We'd love to hear from you if you think what you think, thoughts on the show and thoughts on the comic as well. And going forward now, next week we're back. Starting another season, another show with another book. Can't wait to hear from you. Can't wait for you guys to listen. So in the meantime, peace.